kind of wish to send this to a galaxy far, far away. A long time ago. Wait. Whoops. Let me start again. I hope this isn't the final frontier. So much more to learn. Hey there. Photo Reviews here, bringing you another book to decide. Is it worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pit of Mount Doom? So let's get started. Sorry, I had to move Mount Doom a little closer. Today's book is Star Trek, The Next Generation, Ghost Ship.
Do people who hate Star Trek leave?
Good question.
No, you have to stay even longer.
It was written by Diane Carey, at least I think that's how you say her name. And it was published in July of 1988. I couldn't find an exact date on which it was released, but I think the month is good enough, to be completely honest. The general ratings I found online for this were surprisingly divisive. It's got a 3.9 on Amazon, a 3.2 on Goodreads, I know, right? A 3.9 on Barnes & Noble, a 4.6 on Thrift Books, and a 4.1 on Kobo. As you guys can see, I'm doing 5 now, and I'm just going to list them through instead of the whole thing. Moving on. This book had a spattering of trivia behind it that I want to share with you guys. The first is that this was actually written before The New Generation aired on TV, which meant at times Diane Carey, the author, didn't actually have references for some of the characters she was writing. She had to rely on the series Bible to write these characters without knowing who their actors would be in the future or anything. And you can kind of tell that by reading through. Some characters get a lot more physical descriptions than other characters. But in the end, I think it did end up helping this book. I'll go into that later. This comes from the Voyages of Imagination book on page 160. The second piece of trivia is that according to a timeline put out by DC Comics, this book takes place after the events of the episode Hearts of Glory, which is in Season 1, Episode 20. So, although this is technically one of the earliest pieces of New Generation story out there, it actually would fit more as Episode 21 of Season 1. Take that for what you will. So with that nice trivia done, let's go on to the cover. Now, the cover is not much to write home about. Knowing what I know now, it's actually much more understandable. You got Geordi LaForge, Wesley Crusher, I'm thinking that's Wesley Crusher, and Data on here on the cover, just staring out into the space, mixed feelings on them, with a ship in the back here. Now, the ship clearly isn't the Enterprise. I think it's some kind of scientific vessel they use later on. And the planet in the background is supposed to be a gas giant they're studying when this ghost ship comes upon them. The back of the book, there's not much to write about. It's got a background of the stars while reading you the synopsis. Well, like I said, spec should be about the synopsis. I'm not really expecting much else from it. It can do extra, but this serves its purpose, and I can't mind it. The cover, pretty decent for what it's going for. Not great. There was a lot they could do with it. Maybe putting the titular ghost ship in the background, give people a reference to what it looks like, rather than, just relying on it. But I can see why that would be more difficult. They didn't have a Futurama episode then. I'm sorry. I'm going to keep referencing that episode, because that's all I could think about during this book. I apologize now, but I will not promise to stop. With that, we go on to the characters. So I'm not going to go too in-depth on the characters. Even if you've really never watched Star Trek The Next Generation, you probably have some idea what the main cast is just based on cultural osmosis, like I do. A small bit of confession, although I like Star Trek, I've never had the time to just sit down and watch through the old series. I've watched a good portion of Season 1 from the original series, and I've seen a couple episodes here and there of The New Generation, but I've never just sat down and watched the series from beginning to end. It was on Amazon one time, but they took it off before I could get to it. Bastards. Anyways, So what I'm going to do is basically give you their names, the basic description, who plays them in the series, and that's pretty much what I'm going to do. Alright? So, think of it like a lightning round. So, let's begin. You have Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Captain of the Enterprise, famously played by the amazing Sir Patrick Stewart. Then you have First Officer William T. Riker, First Officer of the Enterprise, played by Jonathan Frakes. Then you have Commander Donna Troy. I think it's Donna. Donna or Deanna. But I'm pretty sure it's Donna. I've always heard it pronounced Donna. Whatever. I'm stalling. Commander Donna Troy, Counselor of the Enterprise, played by Marina Sirtis. Now, she is a half-human, half-betazoid alien who has strong psychic abilities. This is important. Lieutenant Commander Data, an operations officer on the Enterprise, played by Brent Spiner, and he is an android often seeking what it means to be human or alive. Then you have Lieutenant Geordi LaForge, helmsman of the Enterprise, played by the amazing LeVar Burton, and he is a blind man who sees through the use of a powerful technology and his own powerful mind. So, characters down? So we move on to the plot. So, before I begin, I need to warn. To simply sum up the plot would be doing this book a very big disservice. The plot itself is rather simple, all things considered. In reality, these pages aren't so much to do with the story directly unfolding as it is to do with the philosophy and the themes the story is trying to tell. So the plot is simple. We start in 1995, where the Soviets, the Soviet Union hadn't dissolved yet. Remember, this was in 1988. They didn't know the Soviet Union would dissolve 3 years later. So, the Soviets are testing a new weapon on a floating aircraft carrier, a sort of EMP, only for the crew to suddenly disappear and the ship to be ripped utterly to pieces by some unknown force. We fast forward to the year 2364, where we come to the Starship Enterprise, still more or less fresh with a new crew and mission, conducting a scientific survey mission over a gas giant. However, in the process of their testing, Troy begins to have psychic emanations. She has a dream regarding the aircraft carrier, and even Riker, after he visits her, sees the captain of the Soviet aircraft carrier in the hall. Now, they don't really get a chance to warn people before this titular ghost ship, which is described more like a floating cloud of energy through space, comes upon the Enterprise.
Whoa, what a cheesy effect.
I'm not an effect!
They're able to avoid it without dying, although it sucks out a massive portion of their energy, as that seems to be its main form of attack, is energy siphoning. And they manage to escape. They manage to escape it. Most of the book deals with debating ways that they either need to escape it or fight it, while further complicating the ramifications that, in essence, this is a prison ship, and it has maybe billions of souls trapped on it. But those of the souls that can still think logically and still have their mind about them, for lack of a better word, want to die because they see this as a fate worse than hell kind of thing. Without that, eventually Jean-Luc Picard, after subjecting himself to a sensory deprivation capsule while also paralyzing everything from the neck down, or even kind of paralyzing everything from the nose down, since he can't talk, comes to the conclusion that it would be better to wipe out the ghost ship with the souls of the people on board than let them live like that. So they, using a theory from Wesley Crusher, they amp up their phaser power. But when that fails to kill the creature, where they fire a bunch of proton torpedoes down into the gas giant and detonate the molten core to shoot up, forcing the creature to absorb so much energy it effectively pops. It goes beyond its capacity and blows up.
So someone would come up with a complicated plan, then explain it with a simple analogy. If we can reroute engine power through the primary weapons and reconfigure them to Melvar's frequency, that should overload his electro-quantum structure.
Like putting too much air in a balloon.
The book ends with Data, who had attempted to go into the thing earlier to see if he counted as a life form to it in his ever-going struggle to determine if what is life and how does he fit into it, recovers. And the souls of the damned basically appearing in the bridge and saluting the crew of the Enterprise. And that's how it ends. Sounds weird, but it's Star Trek, and I know they've had actually weirder episodes, so with that, the plot being done, we move on. Personal opinions. So, personal opinions, compliments. I actually have a fair amount of compliments for this book. Well, yeah, more or less. The book, the compliment one. I really feel for the characters. Now, this may be a product of the fact that the book was written before the series was put out, so Diane Carey knew she couldn't rely on us just already knowing these characters. But, as someone who hadn't watched The New Generation, I deeply appreciated the fact that this wasn't written under the assumption I would know the characters. And there were several scenes in this book that just really, really made me feel for the characters and just get a sense to who they are. A complaint I had with Doctor Who's Only Human was that it wasn't written for anyone but the fans in mind. So, as far as they were concerned, when you picked up the book, you already knew the characters, and you didn't need to know anything more than their names. But this, again, this doesn't do that. It's very rare you're going to be reading this without possibly knowing the cast or crew of The New Generation. So, honestly, I think one of the best examples in this book about that, when Geordi LaForge is talking to Beverly Crusher, the ship's surgeon, doctor, and he's talking about how his visor can make him feel just far more helpless at times than if he was just normally blind. And it's just summed up really nicely in this little quote.
Sometimes, he said, I go through 20 or 30 levels of analysis, and every one takes a piece out of me. When I can't tell what it is I'm seeing, it's not like a sighted person looking at a box and not being able to see what's inside. It's like holding your breath and diving deeper and deeper, no matter how much it hurts. And when you can't touch bottom, you still have to plow back to the surface before your lungs explode. Oh, I can't explain it. I can't make you see.
So, yeah, I really like how the characters are portrayed in this book. That's what I gotta say. Compliment 2. The thread is actually pretty interesting. So I make a lot of jokes about this being Melvar from the Futurama episode.
Oh, what a cheesy effect.
I'm not an effect!
But it's basically, it's really interesting. Honestly, yes, it did feel like it. It's just really mysterious and interesting. It's basically a mass of giant energy that absorbs all the energy it comes into contact with, while also seemingly absorbing organic life and trapping, for lack of a better word, their souls inside of it. Now, we get some hints at what it may be doing. Now, Data, when he comes into contact with it, seems to be picking up some kind of impressions, where it seems to think that it's actually protecting people by destroying their ships and absorbing their forms. It almost seems to think the ship is some sort of danger to them. But the book never stops and says, this is what it really does. This is why it thinks that. This is why it's doing that. This is where it's from. For the most part, the threat is kept very mysterious. And although there is speculation, it is never clarified what it is. But because it's effectively a ship filled with ghosts that's wandering space, I think the fact that I kept it mysterious and powerful really worked in its favor. I actually deeply enjoyed this threat, and I wondered how they were going to get by it. Compliment number 3. The character dynamics of this book are just spot on, and they truly feel like these people interact with each other and have these feelings for each other. And while this definitely is helped by the fact that the book is written by third-person omniscient point of view, where basically that means you're in every character's head at the same time, and you know everything that's going on. It never truly, the relationships never truly feel forced, and they feel genuinely close. Like, Riker and Troy's clear romantic interest in each other, even though they hold different values on certain things and struggle with it. But I personally think the best relationship is Geordi LaForge and Data's friendship. I get a very clear sense that these two are best friends, and that they take what happens to the other person personally. Geordi more than Data in this book. But it's really nice and sweet. It made me really like the characters. And it's just, I feel this is another great point in the book's favor. I mean, especially with as often as the characters just seem to sit down and talk to each other in this book. Because it is very heavy with philosophy. But yeah, that is a point in this book's favor, and that's what I like about it. But no book is truly complete unless it has complaints. Okay, I know a book isn't ever truly complete if it doesn't have complaints. That's just me trying to be dramatic. Please don't type it angrily at me. I want to find a book that I have absolutely no complaints about as much as you. So anyways, my one and only complaint. It's overladen with philosophy. Before you start, I get it. Star Trek The New Generation Star Trek in general actually, has always been dealing with philosophical concepts, and whether or not people want to accept it, Star Trek as a series has always tackled societal issues at the time. I mean, fun fact, Star Trek, the original series, had the first interracial kiss on air.
Yeah, in the 3rd season, I kissed Shatner.
Silence!
So it's not like the series doesn't deal with this kind of stuff all the time. I just personally think in this book, there's too much crammed in. And, okay, let me clarify somewhat. No philosophy in this book or theme in this book ever feels out of place. It all feels like it should belong. But I feel like Diane Carey stuffed so much in there that she wanted to talk about in this book, it can feel very dense. And there are times when it feels more like I'm digging to get past something rather than reading and flowing with the book. And it can create a very slow experience while reading this. Where, like, 8 pages in this felt like 20 pages of Doctor Who, to put a point on it. And this book is only about 258 pages long, which is only about 30 pages more than the Doctor Who book I read. Now, obviously, that is somewhat different. The Doctor Who book had larger print and bigger spaces between them. So, but my point is, to get lost in this long sense of rambling I'm doing, is that because Diane Carey overladens it with all the philosophical talking points you can in this particular book, I feel that at times it was tough to get through. Like I said, it felt more like I was digging my way through certain points of the book rather than just flowing with the book. But yeah, again, that's the only complaint I have. This book overall had more right with it than wrong. So, we move on to the next part. Personal opinion, nitpicks, and gushes. So, start with nitpick 1. I got a bad print. Yeah, no, this has nothing to do with the writer's fault or even really the book itself fault. I blame it more on the printing of it. I got a couple things. I don't know if necessarily if it's a bad print or if it's just so old that some of the words have been fading. Because I can't actually tell when this was printed. At best, I got a little sign here that says someone got it in 98. But looking through the book, it almost seems to say it's a first printing. So that would make it like over 30 years old. The point is that on several pages the words were faded. On some, the line of words was angled just enough to the right that it started to get cut off near the very end. And it never really interfered completely with my reading, but it was noticeable enough that it detracted. That's why it's a nitpick. Gush number 1. Wesley Crusher is done right in this book. I've often heard that Wesley Crusher is a classic example of Mary Sue.
Finally meet. I'm sorry, who are you?
I use Mary Sue as gender neutral. To me, if you are male or female, you are Mary Sue. I don't use the Gary Stu stuff. I'm sorry. Just so we're clear. But yeah, he fits this mold perfectly. He's an avatar for the creator, Gene Roddenberry. I think he even has Roddenberry's middle name. He is given abilities that strain credibility to make him look more awesome. Sometimes other crew look less competent in order to make him look more competent. And he frequently sidesteps conflicts via demonstrations of his amazing awesomeness. So yeah, he's a Mary Sue from all I've heard and seen. At least in the first seasons. I hear he gets better in later, but that's neither here nor there. However, I feel this book does him right. It takes the concept of a 16-year-old boy who is a genius beyond his years and does that concept very well. Yes, he's a genius. Yes, his ability to grasp theory is amazing, but he lacks experience. He lacks the practical application that makes those theories worthwhile. And this is shown several times throughout the book. While he's trying to create a new phaser technology which has much stronger power but uses less energy, he struggles over how to do it. When Data just comes in and finds it and says, "Did you try this?" "Oh, no, I didn't." So yeah. Gordy also thinks about the time when they were talking and Wesley seemed to know everything about how to pilot a ship. So Gordy let him take over to just see what the kid could do. And he soon realized that although in theory Wesley knew how to fly a ship, he had no idea how to do it in practice and was constantly messing up. And it's even further on later when they use Wesley's idea for how to make a phaser more powerful. And see, he had been conducting a unsanctioned experiment down in the warp core. He had the phaser plugged in to charge it and was working on it through there. That's important. So they quickly do what he suggests and remodify the Enterprise's phasers to take into account this theory he has, to try to overload the ghost ship and pop it with energy. And at first it seems to work, only for the amount of energy being put out being too much for the systems to handle, and it goes into a catastrophic meltdown, basically fusing everything together because it got so warm. And there's this brief moment where Wesley realizes, my phaser had none of the safety precautions that the Enterprise engineers thought to put in. Which means had I tested my phaser without someone there to tell me not to, I would have blown up this whole ship and killed everybody. So yeah, it's really nice. Like I said, it makes a clear distinction that even though Wesley is a genius, most of his knowledge is theoretical, not practical. So he has no actual experience putting these facts together, and he can often get tripped up. In addition, he's still just a teenager. He sees reprimands as personal attacks on himself. He does stupid teenager things. It's just, Wesley Crusher is a good character in this, even if he is a genius. Now, some people might wonder, I went on so long about that Cush, why isn't it a compliment? Well, one, I shouldn't have to compliment a book on not making a Mary Sue. That's just how it works. You don't make a Mary Sue. But two, this is also probably more of a Star Trek specific compliment, and if you were just reading this book to read this book, you wouldn't think anything of it. Nitpick 2! The third-person omniscient style is a little too liberal with how often it switches between characters. Now, this is just more of a mild complaint on my end, but when I was reading, it would often go from being in the head of someone like Riker while he's talking, and then most of the time in the next paragraph, but once or twice even in the same paragraph, we suddenly switch to who he's talking to and we're in their head instead. It's just one of those, it's too sudden and you have to stop and say, oh, okay, we're in this character's head now. It breaks the flow of reading. And that's just a real big downside of the third-person omniscient style of writing, is that oftentimes authors will do that. They'll just switch over to a new character with little to no warning, and you have to quickly readjust to be in their head. And it's just a downside for me. Again, that might just be something personal for me, and that's why I put it here in nitpick instead of complaint or anything. It also doesn't happen that often. So, with that, we get to the final verdict. Eight out of 10. Yeah, this book was good. I recommend it heavily. It's a good book, whether or not you're a fan of Star Trek. It doesn't expect you to be intimately familiar with the source material, and it's just the lore of the world. It's really good. Do I recommend this book? Yes. It's a good book, whether or not you're intimately familiar with the source material, its characters, or its lore. It doesn't expect you to know any of that. It's a bit heavy on themes, and it can feel a bit arduous to read through at times. But, so if that's not really your thing, I guess I can say maybe avoid this book. But if that doesn't scare you away, I heavily recommend this book. Not just as a Star Trek, not just as if you like Star Trek, but if you like sci-fi in general. Find this book and read it. It's good. Obviously, with that glowing recommendation, the question of does it deserve Mount Doom is obviously going to be a no. So yeah, that's really all I got to say. So I bet you're all wondering what I'm going to do next. Well, again, I was told I was wrong. That the story I was reading had nothing to do with the holiday had nothing to do with Star Trek. So let's go over what we know. It's from a long-loved sci-fi franchise. It takes place in the stars, deals with wars, has a fan-beloved main character that was recently brought into the live-action era and destroyed with the newest incarnation. I know exactly what you guys are talking about. Halo.
May the 4th be with you.
I guess I'm doing Star Wars next? Jeez.